Welcome to Refuel with Jennifer Ballou. Join Jennifer for the next hour for a time to recharge, refresh, and refuel your heart and soul. Here's your host, Jennifer Ballou.
Hey everyone, welcome to the show. I am so happy to have you here with me this, I was going to say Sunday, like I'm still recording live, but oh goodness. Anyway, it's been a crazy week. I don't know if the rest of you have felt it, but goodness. So there's no telling what's going to come out of my mouth when it's my turn to talk. Okay. So, I sat down with my friend, Michelle Brogan, and I've had her on the radio show before. So if, you've been a long time listener, you've probably heard me talk about her. You've probably, hopefully heard her interview a long time ago. But Michelle tells a little bit about herself, but I wanted to tell you a little bit more. She is just a phenomenal friend and believer. And even when we finished up our interview, she told me, "Thank you for letting me just sit and talk Jesus." And that's really our friendship is so based on that it's one of those things where it's just so good to sit and just talk Jesus and what you're going through, what he's done, what he's shown you, different things like that. And so that's just kind of basically how our interview went. It's going to be a 3-week, I think. Don't hold me to that, but my thought is this is going to be a 3-week long series. So, because there's just so many good, takeaways and so much to really focus on. And I want to spend the time getting to focus in on some of that really good, rich stuff. So I will just let her take it away. And then we will, I'll jump back on and get into some of those nuggets. So here we go. Okay, guys. So I have with me today Michelle Brogan and her little doggie, Mia, who hasn't decided if she likes me or not, so she may bark. So, Michelle, just tell everybody who you are, what you do, and then we'll kind of get into things.
So I'm Michelle Brogan, and I am married to an incredible man, Alec, for I think it's going to be 23 years, coming up in September.
Cool.
I have 2 kids, 16 and 18, and they're amazing. And I have a ministry called Dance Revolution, which you know very well. You've been coming to DR for, I think, the 20 years that we've been around. It's a dance convention that we travel all over with and just really want to spread excellence in the arts, but also tell people about Jesus through that.
Yeah.
And if really the mission statement was always changing the face of dance, because the face of dance has a lot of different faces, but we need one that's transformational, inspirational, and truthful.
Yes.
That was what we set out to do 20 years ago.
I think we've accomplished that a lot over the years.
Yes, we
keep going.
There's more to do, and through that we started an internship called Ingredients Training Program, which of course you know well because your daughter went through it.
Yes, I've talked about it several times on the show too.
That's so incredible. Now she works with us, and that's amazing. And then we started the Epicenter for the Arts about 8 years ago, which is a community-based training center for dance, music, acting, and we just do it for Jesus, for Jesus alone. But through that, we're training kids from the inside out and in dance and performing arts, because that's really what we feel like our vein is.
Yeah. I love the new slogan, words. It's not really a slogan, but the leaders.
Training leaders and legends in the arts.
Yes. I love that.
We just really feel like, we have to teach people that they are leaders. I think a lot of people think leaders are on the stage or the leaders of the company.
Yeah, or influencers kind of a thing.
Right. But leader is an influencer.
Right.
But you can influence by walking in Target by a look you give.
Right.
Or how you treat people or how you carry yourself or what you're wearing in the wrong way. So everything we do is leading. And legends to me is, what imprint are you leaving that no one else will leave once you're gone?
That legacy.
It's about legacy.
Yeah.
So that's what we want to do.
Yeah.
With this generation.
It's awesome. They need that molding. I think Jessica and I spent a lot of time talking this morning about just the different generations and the different view and aspects and perspectives of the generations. And I think what's key is that we need to recognize that we need all the generations. Even as irritating as some are to us, like as an older as an older generation, we still need, we need to see what Gen Z sees and what they have to bring to the table and stuff. So
absolutely. I think that's Titus 2, I think. I don't have it right in front of me. I mean, it's biblical. It is.
But I think a lot of the times we take it as just the older generation telling the younger generation what to do.
Right.
Instead of, hey, there's a reason these kids are here and the way they are. We need to look at that perspective too.
And learn.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
I wholeheartedly believe that.
Yeah. You also have a boutique in Bee Culture.
Yes, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
That's so new. I forgot about it. I feel like I've been doing a boutique my whole life.
I know, yeah.
So I just let everybody in my closet. So that started, 2 years ago?
Yeah, I think so.
We just started taking it on tour, just clothes, because I was thinking about all the moms that are there, and they're always asking me questions about clothes and, texting me or, whatever, however they can get a hold and be like, where'd you get this? And I thought, this is so fun. Why don't we just open something up for them to do at the convention, because they're sitting around the whole time and get to know each other and feel loved on as well. And clothes sometimes makes us feel that.
It does.
So I wrote something today that I was like, that's really my heart is God is the interior designer of who we are. Of course, he created the exterior, but I think a lot of what his mission is he's our interior designer with our heart. And I'm like, for me, clothes have always been a way to celebrate what he's done on the inside of me. So some people are like, oh, that's too bold to wear, that pattern. I'm like, but the pattern and the colors and the feel is how I feel about what he did for me. So it's my way of like declaring it on the outside. And walking in confidence when I don't always feel confident maybe about the way I look. I have to go from the inside out. And that's what I wanted to start for women. So I started the boutique.
Yes. And it's amazing. It's funny. I mean, I've probably mentioned it on here before, but just how similar we run, you and I, on things. I'm just the small town girl. And you're not.
I've never been in a small town. I'm always like, how do you do it?
I know.
What, radio station? My goodness, no Target?
Nope, there is not.
That's crazy.
There is no Target.
Well, he knows what we need to be called to.
Yes.
You small town and me, no. I don't know what I would have done. But yeah. But we are a lot alike.
That's fun. Yeah. It's fun.
Yes.
So, really, I wanted to have you on just to kind of share with everyone. Well, there's a couple of different things. We can talk about kingdom principles in business, influencing just that perspective of this is the mission field. We can talk about just the faith that it took for this past season to walk into the new things. I think that's those two things are a lot of what we've been talking about on the show. So either way you want to step into any of that.
I was just talking yesterday. I was on another podcast yesterday with a girl from Germany. Such an interesting perspective in the arts and what they're doing over there of what the pandemic has brought in this season. And it was hard for me a little bit to talk at times because I was like, well, we're in it's about Texas. If we're in Texas, things are more, what I've been able to do. Right. And the Lord really like pivoted me for a second and was like, it wasn't just that you're in Texas. It's that my promises aren't run by predicament. So no matter where you are, when we couldn't get to the studio, when we couldn't travel, we were still moving forward.
Right. Yeah.
And so he really taught me a lot about you. There's always a way. If you look to me, there's always a way to get to my people. And that's one thing about it's been 11 months. God,
yeah.
We're coming up on the year anniversary of where I think all of us learned a lot about ourselves and a lot about the world. The world changed a year ago in a way that I don't think any of us expected. So I think it's going to be an interesting next month for all of us to reflect. But I remember where I was when the president got on and talked about this pandemic. And I was like, what is that? I don't even, I've heard it in a movie.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden my perspective started changing. I remember for 2 months I lived listening to the narrative of what was coming across the TV, what I was seeing on social, because it was so new. There wasn't a really way none of us knew what to do. So we went to that narrative.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that narrative painted a picture for me of fear where I was still moving forward and saying things with my mouth, but in my heart, I was fearful. I was what is this going to look like for our family with sickness? What is this going to look like for our business? So even though a lot of times I do believe in moving forward with your faith, even though the humanity of you is struggling, you still have to move forward. But I needed my humanity to line up with my spirit, because my spirit knew God's promises. It knew what he called me to do. And we always have to be ready to let go. You know, I walk with God with a very open hand.
Yeah.
You have to do that so that when something that maybe was more flesh than it was spirit happens, you don't get mad at God. That's what a lot of people do, is then they get mad at God because they're like, well, he didn't. And I'm like, that was really you.
That's what something you wanted to see happen.
And that's a big maturity factor in the kingdom of just like open hand. But in it, I knew he had promised us some things. He had promised me a tour name and showed me things. He had I felt like the building, and he gave us this building. We went through this whole process to finally get a lease in our hands. And we did the day of the pandemic being announced. Yes. Came in the email. And I was like, this is not like, I don't even know how to call it celebrate, because we're now going into this weird vibe. Like maybe this was the Lord closing the door. So I would say about 2 months, not a lot of people knew. Close people knew I was struggling with fear. I was now, like I said, if you look at old videos and everything I sent out of the studio, my spirit would rise up. It would rise up, and I'd be like, boom, this is what it is. But at night, when I would let my humanity and my flesh kick in, there was fear. And so I really learned to let the Lord speak to me about his promises and about circumstances. So that's what I would say to most people. What I still see people dealing with is the predicament and the promise. And we're always going to have a predicament. Yep. This just happened to be a corporate predicament. It was awesome in that, because I felt like in March, all of us were on the same page. Then June came, and then we're all on a different page again. So there's a different predicament, and you had to move through that as well. People don't understand. I had to move through that as a leader, and then also that as a leader, because I have a very diverse staff. I believe in that. That is my tribe. Those are I don't care about your background, about your skin color and all those things. For me was a big deal at that time to go, this is what we've been doing all along. We've been trying to bring unity all along. Right. But a different predicament came up. So in that, you really had to stand on, God, what are you speaking? What are you doing in this time? Because we cannot let all of that. Now you have to be aware of what's happening. You have to be aware, to be sensitive to that, and move through it culturally, not change for the culture. Right. Move through it culturally of what's happening, and let God be the one that moves you forward in that. But for me, it was really going, okay, I feel the predicament. I feel the change. I feel the circumstances. Now, what are you saying through that? And he said, I haven't changed what I've said. So why are you changing how you feel and what you think I'm doing? So for me, it was walking out on that ledge every morning. Like if it fails, it fails. If I fail, if this doesn't come to pass, but always saying yes every morning was a new yes. And in that season, I feel like all of us, especially leading things, had to find a new yes every day, because everything was always changing. All of a sudden I had to be the doctor. I had to be the principal. Like I had to be all the things that I was like, I didn't sign up for this. On the show, I think, cause I was, recording the show at home and not being out with people, it was really hard for me to hear what God was wanting to speak out into the atmosphere. Right. Cause just being at home, it's not like I couldn't hear God's voice, but I hear it more when I'm watching people or things and whatever. So it was really hard. And I think once a week, I would get up to record, and, that would be on the plan for the day. I'm going to record the show for today, and I would have an absolute meltdown, and I would spend the day, crying. I put the recording stuff away. I would, clean out a closet or something, because to me, that's where I could really focus in and hear God and calm down. So my house is really well organized now. When the snow and everything hit, there was nothing else to clean. I was a little aggravated about that. Anyway. But yeah, it was just this like constant, okay, I'm good. And then, no, I'm not. This is not good. I don't know what to do. I can't, whatever. I guess that is what, the humanity hit, and you're just like, God, can I really hear you? Why in this secluded place am I not, seeing what to do? And it was interesting getting to a place where you're like, oh, okay, now I can, and I can calm down to not have this thing. So, but yeah, it was crazy. Yeah. And I think that's where we have to all be okay with, like, at that porch I'm looking at. I know everybody can't see that, but that's where I cried almost every day. And I think people are like, oh, you're so strong, you moved forward. And I was like, I still had to work through so many emotions in that and let Jesus speak to me through the emotions he felt. Because I think sometimes as Christians or as leaders, we're like, we can't have emotions, or we have to like move forward. And it's like, yeah, I moved forward, but then I had to go out there with my father and cry and be like, this is what I'm feeling. I need you to move me through this, because I think emotions are okay as long as we don't make decisions off of them.
Right. Yeah.
So he would really take me to Jesus. I mean, I learned so much about Jesus emotionally through the pandemic, of the things he felt, the things he experienced, the grief, the solitude, all of the things, not being understood, having to be away from people, all the things, 40 days in a desert. Like, we were in a pandemic but we weren't alone. Right. You know, like we were away from people, but I was like, my gosh, what is it like to be alone right now? Like thinking about how I had my family, and God brought me back to the root of like, you actually gonna cook for 9 weeks and all the things. And I was like, oh my gosh. But he allowed me to work through emotion, because I think that's where I see a lot of Christians stuffing and trying to move forward with this, like, we're doing this, but not allowing God to work through the grief. Yeah. Like, I had to grieve. I had to. There's things this year, even though incredible things happened, things still had to get put on the back burner. Yes. You know, we didn't celebrate our 20th year. We had to let go of locations. We had to do things virtually. That was still a grieving process as we move forward. Yeah. So I think that's where I think people need to know that God is ready for the emotion. He will not let you sit in it. Right. He will move you through it, but he moved Jesus through it. Jesus sweat blood, and then he went on to the cross. He cried about Lazarus, and then he saw him raised. There's all these times he flipped over the tables, because I felt like flipping over tables. Yes. So many times. But after that, then healing came through the process of justice. And I think that's where I had to learn to go ahead and, you know, let my father see me want to flip the tables, want to cry in grief. And then from that, I got stronger and was able to move forward in that.
I think when you learn to do that, you also learn to recognize emotions for what they are. That this is just an emotion. This is a trigger from something, you know, that this is not reality. It is just how I feel. Let's deal with that and then go on. And I mean, I think for me during all that time, that was a big learning thing too of, oh, okay, it's okay. Let's feel all the things. Know that it's a feeling. Tomorrow's a new day, and we go on.
Right.
You know?
Right. And some feelings you have to get you out of danger.
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
Like fear.
They're to recognize that something.
Like, if you didn't grieve after somebody died, I think you'd explode. Yeah. You know, it's like God gave us these things. So that's where I stopped feeling guilty about, because I was starting to feel guilty. Like, you're supposed to be strong. Everybody thinks you're strong, Michelle. And it's like, okay, I'm strong in him. But in my humanity, I have weaknesses. And until I get with him on it, then that's when he makes us strong. Yeah. In our weakness. But we have to reveal our weakness to him. People that try and always cover up. Like, they're not revealing. He knows it's there, but they have to give that to him. Yeah. Through your vulnerability with him. Yeah. So that was a lot what I learned to be able to move forward and do the things we've done in the last 5 months. I mean, it's a big undertaking, the things we've done during a crazy time. But then I felt like I had worked through some of the things that I don't know if I would have stopped to do if we hadn't had the pandemic. If we hadn't had to make some decisions about how to love people right. And then going through an election, all the things, that was thrown at us in 1 year. I'm really hoping everybody took that as an opportunity and not as this is terrible. Right. Yeah. It's an opportunity. Yeah. To grow.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell everybody what has transpired. The building and.
Yeah. So we had our building for 8 years, and we really felt like we needed to move, and.
They needed a bigger building.
We needed a bigger building, and it was not just bigger. I mean, it's like better location, bigger, but with bigger comes more, you know?
Yeah,
and so with that, you had to just go, okay, God, we're going to count, the Bible says, look and count the cost before you build the house. And so we did that with him and partnered with him in that. So we moved into a new building. We gained students through the pandemic for our studio. I was able to resurrect the boutique, because I really put that on the back burner because during the pandemic, and I was like, that's the last thing. I know people are shopping online, but I didn't need to focus on that. And that was where, too, a lot of people need to learn to there's certain things, doesn't mean it's dead in a season. It means it needs a little hibernation, and that's not a failure. It's that what needs your attention now. So that got resurrected. We did do our tour, and we didn't celebrate the 20th, but yet God celebrated it with us. It was my favorite tour we've ever done. 2 locations. I'm still calling it a tour because it was a tour in and of itself.
Oh, right.
It was, you know, and then what he did out of that with the canceled locations and took our production outside of the convention, and the people that touched from the Philippines and Switzerland and Germany and Africa that have still let us know how they went out and bought tickets in their community and gave them out, like crazy stuff that we still got to move forward in. And so new businesses came out of that. We've started, you know, we're starting a photo studio, you know, all the things that when he gives you something, he doesn't just give you something to double it. He gives you something to expand your territory and your scope. And so that all did happen right about, you know, the start of the year. And we did move our tour. Usually it's in November, but we decided to do it in January. And so I think it was interesting that he did a lot of this in 2021.
Yeah.
You know, not like, and, you know, I think a lot of us think it's all the American calendar that God operates on. He knows that we operate off of seasons. And so he makes it about seasons. But when you look, the Bible says a day is like 1,000 days, and 1,000 days is like, you know, it's not the same to him.
Right.
But even in my mind, I'm like, oh, he turned the chapter of 2020.
Yeah.
And he did all this coming out of a season where I know not everybody has that same story. But there's still a story in that. You know? And so, all that happened, and we're going back to our competition season now. We still have all of our interns, and we've had to learn to pivot. A ton of them have had COVID. So you have to learn. Thank God for Zoom. Everybody couldn't stand Zoom, right? A while back. Because like, we don't want it virtual. But then I was like, God gave you the gift of Zoom. Yeah. God gave us the gift of being face to face now, that when you have to stop for a second, we can still be together.
Yes. Yeah. You can keep up with everything.
Yes. It was so eye-opening to me. So our internship, everybody's still here. We've been operating with that. And they've been performing and getting on stages where I know not everybody gets that where they live. But even if we wouldn't have gotten that, I would have made a way to virtually do it. Yes. You just do it. Yeah. And so it's been crazy.
Yeah. I think even with, this is what's crazy to me. In the place of the arts, New York, Florida, California, just Disney, gonna say it, you know, all these places where these incredibly talented, creative people are. And yet they really haven't figured out how to be creative in doing what they do. That blows my mind.
Well, because their narrative that's when you know your narrative is based on truth. Yeah. So for me, we went to Disney. And listen, if you're listening to me, I love Disney.
We're big Disney girls.
Big Disney people. But the problem is you're there. I go. There's no dancers. Yeah. There's no nothing, but there's 150 people there stationed to tell you to put a mask on. So they invest in that narrative and not the narrative that built them to who they were, right? Yeah. Now, and that's not based on Jesus. I'm just saying we've forgotten what built who you were. And we're going to listen to this narrative first and not be able to pivot. Right. And that's where I think the Lord, this was the season of the pivot. And if you didn't know how to do that, you didn't survive. And when I say survive, I mean, that's where I think a lot of people are just like, well, this is just how it's going to be. Well, no. Right. That's where the promise should have stood through the predicament. Right. And you're right. I was sad at Disney. I was like, wow, like we put more stock into telling people to put masks on, but there's nobody on the stage anymore. There's nobody to bring the quote unquote magic of what made Disney what it is. So now we're doing we're more involved in the predicament. And it changed the quote unquote magic when I was there. I was like, this is so sad because we've been employing people to dance. We've been able to pay people this entire time. Right. Yeah. And they would do it without pay because it's ministry, but we want to pay people. This is a job. Yeah. Yeah. And so I think about all the things we've been able to do to be able to keep his kingdom going in this season and watching people with billions and billions of dollars to not be able to pivot. And that was, put some screens up, have your dancers dance on the screens and let us watch that, if anything. Right. So that's where it's been amazing to me to watch as well. You're correct in like, we weren't able to pivot. And we don't know the ins and outs of the government and all of that. Of what has been told to them. Yeah. I think watching though from here and then experiencing it at Disney, which thank God they're open again and they're letting people in. So there's bright sides to that.
There is.
I thought to me though, watching, like,
I feel like, we have a creative God,
right?
Where the only thing that he created that has that creativity, like, even if you aren't necessarily a believer, you can still tap into that creativity. And as the arts, they have just shut down. That is just blows my mind. I say it to my husband all the time. I'm like, I don't understand. If in a little small town, I could creatively change how we do our show and everything about it and make a movie and have a movie premiere. Why in Hollywood figuring something out? That just blows my mind.
And some of them did. I was impressed with some of it. I remember watching American Idol.
Yeah, they
figured and they did it at home, and you're like, okay. And so even with, watching that, I would cry watching American Idol during the pandemic, because I was like, oh, this took us back to our homes, and it was a very emotional experience watching American Idol. And though it was the same, it wasn't the big lights. We learned in that season that was more special.
That's talent.
It's talent. And so there was a lot of pivoting that I did watch that I was like, that's impressive, and I felt it. But then, like I said,
there's so much.
And if you're listening to me, don't call us about Disney. We love Disney.
Right.
It was just sad.
My kid's fixing to go again. My husband and I were like, do we go? And
you can
risk,
go, and you don't have to wait as long in line.
The other two killing us,
right?
Or great. Not. So yeah, we'll always support Disney, and Broadway and all those places. I just kind of want to go. Come on.
Right, because we have a heart for them.
Let's pivot. Let's go. Let's see the arts. This is the time for the arts to be,
absolutely
exploding.
I'm ready to go see my Broadway shows again.
Yeah.
So
yeah, because you go yearly.
I go yearly, and I support it, and I get what you're saying. It's just been really eye-opening and sad, and not knowing what those people are going through back where they are, and decisions, like I said, with New York. But it has been very eye-opening to see how we pivot and how we don't.
Okay, so I just wanted to stop right there and for this week and just kind of look at and focus in on a few key points. And like she said, don't be calling us, hating on us about that stuff we said about Disney and, Hollywood and Broadway. It really is, to me, one of those things that made me just stop and think wow, we have to be so tuned in to what God is doing in a season. And I loved what she said about the promise and the predicament. And that's really what we're going to focus in on and jump into here in just a minute. But, and a lot of you probably aren't dancers. And you may not know a lot of studio owners and different things like that. I do. And it was just amazing to me, the amount of studios that closed during this time, and the ones that were able to keep going. And, they're not necessarily labeled as Christian studios or whatever, but I think it was those people that could really tap into God and look for creative ways. And like she said, you look at the promise, not the predicament, because the promise doesn't change. And they were able to keep moving forward. And that's true of a lot of businesses. And it doesn't necessarily happen to be something that, happened just in this last year. But that, whenever we come up in a trial or something that is so, outside of what we thought things would look like, that we can tap in to and get in that place where we're really locked into God and saying, okay, what are you saying about this situation? Remind me of the promise. Help me look at this differently, maybe, or just aspects of that we need to learn to sit down and look at. So we're going to keep talking about this, but one of the other key word in there is pivot. So pivot, promises, and predicaments. I'm sure I'll get tongue-tied here in a minute. That's a lot of P words. but when, just sitting there with her, and we were both sitting down on the floor in her game room, it was nice just hanging out. But when she said that about, my promises aren't run by predicaments, and I listened to her and I was like, oh yeah, just kind of soaking that in. And over the last several days, I've gotten to just sit and think about that. And when we start looking in the Word, how we can really see that. And of course, the first, story that comes to mind to me is when the Israelites were ready to cross into the promised land. Okay. I mean, the word promise is even in there, this was the land that God had promised them. This was their territory. God said, look, this is yours. I want you to go in here, and I want you to occupy this place, and I want you to, raise your families here, the generations to be here. This is your place, the land of milk and honey. This is the good stuff. This is the sweet spot. This is your destiny. It was the promise. And they came up against a predicament. And they looked like big, ugly, scary giants. And, Caleb and Joshua, I hope I don't screw that up. Y'all know how bad I am with names in the Bible. I don't know why. Because it's not like I don't know it. Anyway. Please be right. Okay, so Caleb and Joshua, they look at the giants and they say, okay, that's a predicament, but here's what the promise says. The promise says, this is ours. We're going to go in and occupy this land. This is our territory. It's what God has promised us. But the rest of the Israelites in the same exact situation, all those men saw the exact same giants. All those men saw the exact same land that was theirs, that was promised to them. And they looked at the predicament and they said, we can't do it. How many times in your life have you come up against something? And now that you can really, stop and think about it, how many times did you look at the predicament and not the promise? And because I'm going to tell you, it's hard. It's hard to remember it in the middle of a situation. It's hard to focus in on the promise when you are in the middle of a predicament. I don't know that I would have not been one of the ones saying, excuse me, sir, there's giants. In my brain, giants, obviously they're bigger and stronger. Do they eat people? What do they do? What do giants do? I don't know. It just seemed really scary. And that's what they were looking at. And all of us have lived through predicaments. And of course, this past year has been one heck of a predicament. And we tend to focus in on that, instead of the promise. This is what you promised me, God. That land is mine. I have the authority. I have the ability. I have all those things that you promised me. They're mine. They're within my reach. All I have to do is, go in. But we so often let that predicament just dictate to us where where we can or can't go. And then I think of Abraham and Isaac. Because, man, that was a promise. That was a long awaited for promise for Abraham to have his son, to have an offspring with Sarah. I mean, this was the one that God promised him. And then God says, I want you to take him up and put him on the altar. And honestly, Abraham could have looked at what God asked him to do as a predicament, And, I think a lot of the times too, we think of Isaac as a baby, that, Abraham walked up the mountain with him and carrying him as a little baby to put up there. This was not a baby. This was a child. And I don't know if you've been around children lately, but they don't just go anywhere without asking lots and lots of questions. So not only is this, there is this predicament of God asking him to lay his son on the altar, that is compounded by the 9 million questions that we know children can ask, especially when they're going on a trip. And they're going up a mountain. And Abraham chose to look at the promise all that way, all through that whole journey. He focused in on the promise and on Jesus, on what God had said he would do, that his offspring would outnumber the stars. He held on to that promise. He knew what God had brought him through, and he knew what God would, continue in his faithfulness. And so all I can think of is this, picture of Abraham patiently evading Isaac's questions as they go up this mountain. And he was probably having this dialogue with God the whole time, saying, God, you promised, I'm going to go lay my child on the altar. I'm going to lay this thing that you promised me, this dream. I'm going to take it and I'm going to lay it on the altar. I'm looking to you for this promise. I'm not looking at the predicament. I'm not looking at the things around me, the obstacles. I'm not looking at the giants. I am looking at the promise. This was the promise you gave me, and I'm going to keep walking into that. And I'm sure there was grieving in that. There was heartbreak. There was probably some anger. But he kept looking at the promise. And Caleb and Joshua, I'm going to go back to them. They looked at that promise and no one else would look at it with them. All they saw was the predicament. And I said, we ain't doing it. We're not going. We're not taking the land. We're not going to go in and celebrate. We're putting our foot down, not doing it, not having it. I'm going to listen to the fear. And so they wandered for 40 years. So Caleb and Joshua, 40 years, wandering the desert with these people that wanted to look at the predicament and not the promise. And just like Michelle and I were talking about, God He knows we operate off of seasons. We operate off of calendars. We have these timelines that we look at all the time, and God's timeline is not ours. He operates in the fullness of time. and he operates in these seasons of, I don't even know how to explain them. You know, you just kind of know when you're in a new season, or it's just a different time, different way of being. And I think that comes a lot with our growth. But, you know, they wandered through that desert, and there was death, and there was new births, and just all the normal life things that happened in the middle of that. But Caleb and Joshua held on to the promise. They held on to that, and they told the stories, and they worked in this narrative. That's, you know, been a big word this season, narrative. But they had the narrative based on truth. And so that younger generation rose up and decided to invest in that narrative. And so they went back into that land. The giants are still there. They're still in a predicament, but they invested in that narrative. They invested in the truth, and they decided that, you know, to believe in God's promises, to have that understanding that the promise stands through the predicaments. God is not scared of those predicaments. It doesn't change the promise. And so they took the land. They went into the promised land. They occupied the territory. So I just feel like, you know, there's a lot of things that we can really ask ourselves in areas where we know God has promised us things. Namely, are we looking at the predicaments? Because there's always going to be predicaments. There always has been predicaments. If you think this was the first time that, you know, a illness occurred in our country and things closed down, or people had to figure out how to pivot, you're wrong. And thankfully, I haven't had to live myself through a world war. I would imagine that is quite a bit of a predicament that you would have to really, you know, look into the, you know, like you had to find a place there to grab hold of the promise and say, God, like this is, help me get through this predicament. You know, that there's always going to be things that we have to learn how to pivot, and that we have to recognize as predicaments, and that his promise still stands. You know, just when he gives us a promise, when he gives us a job, and maybe I'm the only one that sees promise and job as the same thing. I don't know. Maybe it's just because I like to work and that's how my daddy talks to me. But every dream, every yes, everything that, he has, you know, taken me into, and the promises that he's given me, it is for his glory. It is to reach his people. It's to speak his word. It's to share my story and how his faithfulness in my life, to, goodness, but it's, you know, it's to reach people. And his promise will always find a way to reach people. Predicaments don't stop that either. You know, you couldn't stop, the churches pivoted and found new creative ways to reach the people, because that's what God does, because he's relational. And, we need to stop and look at those types of things as well. Or at least I do. That's just, when she shared this with me and I've just been contemplating on it, I just keep thinking of the different stories in the Bible. Like I told you, like, Abraham and Isaac and, Joshua and Caleb and the Israelites, and different things like that I just, I think of Mary, the mother of Jesus, and holding that baby and knowing what the promise was. Did she know what it was going to look like? I don't know. She might have. She might not have. But holding that promise, and when she saw her son on the cross, that's a predicament. But you know what? She stood right there and she held on to the promise. She held on to what God had told her. And she knew his faithfulness, and she walked through that. And, when we were talking about emotions earlier, can you imagine the emotions there? I mean, we get emotional just thinking of what God has done for us and when he died on the cross, but to actually be there and witness it, that would be something else emotionally. So let's spend a little time talking about emotions in the middle of a predicament. I think a lot of the times, we said this a little bit, we feel like you can't be emotional when you're looking at the promise or you're trying to get through a predicament. I think I've lied to myself in that a few times and felt like I was just a mess if I got emotional. And that's just silly. God made us with emotions, and they're healthy. They're something that we need. Michelle did mention that, sometimes they're very necessary. There's a reason that sometimes we are fearful, and we need to listen to that, and double check, our surroundings or whatever. But they're not a good boss. I think I've said that before about emotions. So the thing is just like a predicament, are you going to listen to that narrative? Are you going to listen to the narrative of your emotions? Or do we understand that they're what we're feeling, and we feel those, we deal with that with our daddy, and we move on, that they aren't a sign of weakness, that they are just a sign of us being human. Jesus came to this earth and he put on humanity, and it talks about him having emotions in the word. I think of, the story of Lazarus being dead, and he wept with Mary and Martha, and Lazarus's friends, like he grieved over the death of his friend, even though he knew that he was going to raise him from the dead. He got angry and turned over tables, and there was different things, but those emotions didn't rule him. And I think a lot of the times, especially when you are in a place where you're walking out the promises that God has given you, and you come up against predicaments, there will be emotions involved. because predicaments, they're, that's not an easy thing. That's something that not easy things will make a lot of different emotions come up. And we need to be in touch with those things. We need to know how we're feeling, not just, block it out and put our heads down and keep pressing forward. We need to take the time to sit on the porch and cry. We need to take the time where we put everything down and spend the day, in that, what's the word I'm looking for? In that Sabbath type rest to, let our daddy help with our hearts and for him to weep with us. We need to allow him to do that with us. I mean, if God is a relational God, and we know that he is, that's what he does with, when we are in a relationship with our children, with our spouses, with our friends, when they are happy, we are happy with them. When they are sad, we grieve with them. And a lot of times when they're mad, we get mad with them too. We look for that justice thing. I do anyway. God is he's relational. He wants to cry with you. He's rejoicing with you. He may even flip over a table or two with you. But it's not what rules us, that we can come back to that grounding place with him. And, he can wipe the tears away and then raise those things from the dead. That's just kind of the story of Abraham and Isaac again, that I am sure that he was crying and fighting and whatever else with God on the way up there. And then Isaac was spared, and I'm sure that promise felt like it was resurrected from the dead. And then Mary watched her sweet son die the most horrific death ever on a cross that he did not deserve. And then he was laid to rest and buried in a borrowed tomb. And the tears, I'm sure, for those 3 days were some of the hardest tears that woman has ever cried. And then that promise was resurrected from the dead. That's what our God does. When we are looking at the promise instead of the predicament, when we are investing in the narrative of his truth, he resurrects those things from the dead, those things that look like they are not going to happen, suddenly happen. We walk through those things and his truth prevails. His promises are true, and we keep going from promise to promise. So this next week, I'm encouraging you to look at this past season. What narrative are you listening to? What narrative are you investing in? Did you pivot? Have you learned to pivot? Are you looking at his promise? Are you looking at the predicament? Thank you so much for joining me this week. I cannot wait to have you back next week as we spend some more time with Michelle and pull away some nuggets from that interview.